So thanks again for taking the time for some stillness. I know we all have very, very, very busy lives. Let's see. Oh yeah, it's over here. So as Ernest said, I live in Silicon Valley, which is in some ways very much like Hong Kong, where we are in this very hyper type of world, right? So I hear a lot of people say, I need more balance. And when they talk about balance, generally they're talking about wanting more time for their families, for themselves, maybe for physical exercise, maybe for meditation or practice or study in some way, right? Time for contemplation. However, in this view of talking on balance, it seems to be implying that if they want more of one thing, there must be less of something else because there's finite time and energy. So it's a zero-sum game that it seems that we can never win. And if people did achieve balance for a little while, everything around us changes so fast that that balance could not possibly last. Do you guys have this experience? Yeah? Like it's very difficult to have this thing called balance. It seems to be this thing that people talk about, but it's really not really achievable. So it only leave people feeling more anxious in some way. So what I would like to suggest is integration. So instead of competing with each other, the worlds I'm in, as Ernest talked about, my Buddhist practice at the Zen Center, my life there, and my life in the corporate Silicon Valley life, they don't necessarily compete in terms of time and energy, but rather they infuse each other and they enrich each other. So I think we actually all have this experience of integration. I see Hong Kong is an extremely multicultural place, and so is Silicon Valley. So we actually all have the experience of living in different cultures and different realms at the same time. And that is integration. We actually all live an integrated life in some way. And it's also a very interesting time in history where we're able to do this, right? Like it wasn't possible even just a full generation ago. So we all have this particular experience. For me, I grew up in China. I was born in Dongbei, and then later I grew up in Anhui. And I was born at a time and place where the standard of living was still more akin to that of the Victorian era, right? People made the equivalent of like less than $10 a month. And, still like food wasn't to be taken for granted. And now my life is quite different, clearly in Silicon Valley. And so if I think about the amount of human progress that I have seen with my own eyes, I really do feel like I'm more than 100 years old. That's how much life has changed in my lifetime. And even more so in the people who are younger than I am. We're in a time of massive change, and it's only going to speed up. So I'm not necessarily used to using this. My life in Silicon Valley is the inundation of, too much content and too many people and too many choices, like all of you, I'm sure. However, most nights I go back to this Zen center called Jikoji, which means Compassion Light Temple. It's American Soto Zen in the American way. And it's only an hour away from the heart of Silicon Valley, yet it feels as far away as Japan, right? It's quite a blessing. So indeed, as Ernest said, like if you go to a Buddhist center and then commute one way each way, does that feel, how could that balance possibly work? And I share that concern before I started living there, which was about 2 years ago. And I was already strapped for time in my life, so how could I possibly find more time for the daily meditation schedule at the Zen Center, for the longer commute, and for the responsibilities of running the center, which the residents hold. And there's only about 10 people living there, so it's a tiny place, and there are projects and jobs to do to keep the center running and to hold the Sunday public programs that we spread the Dharma. However, like many things in life, you just don't know what the possibilities are until you actually try it. Our mind cannot actually imagine the possibilities. You have to actually taste it, right? So luckily, I tried it for a month because that's actually how the residency program works there too. And once I tried it, I found actually time took on a different quality. time became more spacious. And not only while I'm there in nature at the Zen Center at a slower pace, but even my time at work during the day with all the busy meetings and emails and so on had a somewhat of a different quality. So then I was very intrigued to try it more. What I want to talk about is essentially this type of coming together, the two worlds enriching each other. So instead of this picture of balance, the mental picture I want to suggest is that of, ink, Chinese ink, for example, in water. The beautiful tendrils quickly reach off the water, and the ink and water become inseparable. And so from the standpoint of Buddhist practice, I can say that we are the ink and we're the water. We're practice and we're life. Spiritual practice is this coming together of the relative and the absolute, right? The world out there and the meditation we have, and the realization that they're one and the same. So when the practice and life are inseparable, that's what I call integration, and that's what I call alchemy, Buddhist alchemy. Alchemy, in the sense of the word, is the transformation of baser materials into more precious materials. So the analogy I'm drawing here is when we act from a standpoint of integration, what we touch and we act in the world is a sort of wisdom, right? It's more integrated action, it's more immediate action, and it's wiser, more skillful action. So that's kind of the mental picture I want to suggest. So I'm speaking to you because I have some experience of this experience of integration, actual direct experience of integration, but also because I know what it's like to be without. When I was growing up, I was a very, very shy child, and I really struggled with connection with my parents and those around me. When I was an early teenager, I had so much anxiety and insecurity that I had a lot of physical difficulties, including stuttering. So as you can imagine, like speaking in front of a crowd of people isn't my natural behavior. But what saved me, or rather, like in my early teens, I felt I was looking down at this life of incredible hardship and isolation. I felt really disconnected from other human beings in a way. And that really was scary to me. But I had enough strength of will to say that I don't want that to be my life. How could I change that? So what really saved me and connected me were the little bits of nature. I grew up in a university campus, not too different from this one. There were just little pockets of nature, and some of the trees and shrubs so on also had labels. So just in those little pockets of nature, I had this great sensation of delight and beauty and joy. We had lotus leaves as well in Hefei at this university campus. So, the little balls of water, like mercury, right, with the whole world reflected in it, gave me a lot of joy and wonder, and I would stare at it for hours. Or the arches formed by the sycamore maples, right, that line the streets would lift me the way one might feel in a beautiful church. So I felt in those moments, and I was 5 or 6 years old, I felt like I tasted the secret of life. Do you guys want to know what the secret of life is? As experienced by a 5 or 6-year-old? I felt like if I looked closely enough at anything, instead of like a pixel, let's just for the sake of speaking, instead of pixel, I felt like I could see a dazzling rainbow of colors in that one little spot. And the sensation of experiencing that is like honey on the tip of my tongue, and my little taste buds rejoicing. So the secret is this, that beauty is synonymous with meaning, and it's all around me in perfect abundance, anytime I wanted to return to it. Without consciously knowing, I was tasting the sweetness of existence, which taught me everything that I know, everything that I have always known, which I'm trying to share with you now. So I want to talk a little bit then about some discoveries I made along the way of integration in the hopes that it could be helpful for you. So the first one is to see everything as practice and practice simply. Not everyone clearly can live at a spiritual center or want to, and also not everyone want to go on a spiritual retreat, right? Even though in Silicon Valley, for sure, it's now become fashionable for people to go on extended retreat, like Vipassana retreat or Zen retreat. But now everyone has the ability to leave their families or their job or the inclination to do so. But the point of that kind of rigorous practice is for people, to have the experience of being present with what is, which could happen anytime and any place, right? With the dishes in your sink, with the person you're talking with the work on your table, in the commute, right? So just to give a little bit of example from my own life, at the Zen Center, there's 6 a.m. Zazen, Zen meditation. And I'm not a morning person by any stretch of the imagination. So the 6 a.m. meditation is and will continue to be a challenge for me. But I do it simply, right? I don't question it. I just do it as much as I can. There are some mornings I can't make it, I can't get up, but that's okay. I don't punish myself for it, but the next morning I will try it with simplicity. And there's a short ritual, merit practice that follows the meditation. I used to also have some resistance to it, but now I embrace it because it gives me a sense of humility and openness to start the day. So by simplicity here, I don't mean something that is necessarily monastic starkness. The temple I live in is a pretty relaxed American Zen center where everyone is welcome. One doesn't have to be wearing Zen robes or be ordained or have sworn off material world to be able to practice in this way. So that's not what I mean by simplicity, nor is it something like going back in time like the 1950s or 60s, because our world do not go backwards. What I mean by simplicity is more like an attitude, is to face everything straightforwardly with vitality. The vitality that comes with your life form, right? With this physical body. So that is a way to face everything. And by doing that, my life has drastically become easier. What used to feel hard is now easy because I simply do it without questioning it. So in terms of work, it also has transformed from the inside out, and I trust my responsibility, right? We all have responsibility in our lives, but I can break down the word into our ability to respond in the present moment. So my work makes more sense to me than before, and as a director, my work may look very much like anyone else in technology. There's too much content, there are too many decisions, and how do I navigate that world? How do I make choices? How do I know where to put my energy, right? Those are questions I still face every day. However, I've found myself thinking much less than I used to a few years ago. And actually my life has become easier, smoother, while it has more content, while my life has taken me to amazing places I wouldn't have thought possible before. So by doing less, actually more is happening. Just to give another example, life brings us challenges, right? In a meeting, sometimes a conflict might arise. People might disagree, and tensions, come up, right? And people seem to be stuck. I would have no actual idea of what could happen, what to do. But I've learned to just trust my ability to respond and trust my own intention of it being good, essentially. I don't question whether or not I would fail in that situation. I would just lean in and see if something comes to me in that moment, and generally something would. I would open my mouth and offer a little bit of a suggestion or simply a comment on what's actually happening, a recognition of the current situation, or maybe a little bit of kindness towards someone in the room. And more often than not, someone else would then offer something else, and someone else, and someone else, and then the situation would start to unfold or to shift. So in the middle of a situation is a kind of knowing. So if you become that situation, you feel that knowing, which is not a solution, but it's a way of navigating the territory. Another example could be, I lead several small teams, and I often need to coach them to cultural communication dynamics, for example. In many of my staff are Asian background, and so in Silicon Valley culture, they need to sometimes counter their training or their upbringing and speak up more, right? And question hierarchy, just be able to be more direct and assertive and so on. So in coaching them, I bring up actually Buddhist concepts without using those specific terms. I talk about things like basic goodness and rightness, right? Trusting that whatever they do is right in the sense that if it's happening, it's right, and it has a reason for happening. And so over time, actually, I see when I tell my story of my integration, or when I ask them about their story of what's meaningful for them, what drives them, what made them want to act in a particular situation, I would see a twinkle in their eye, right? And then they open up, and something else would shift, and they become more lively, more vibrant. And then over time, I see them becoming individuals with more creativity, with a greater range, right? And they can choose to become a slightly, assertive person if they want to, but they don't have to. It's simply that they have had a greater range. So over time, I've recognized that, what I do may look different on the surface to, from one job to another. But what I'm actually doing is that I'm in the transformation business. So one of my missions in life is that I remove the barriers of what is possible, so that people can become anything that they want to be. So if in my life I didn't know how to connect with people for much of it, I've certainly learned a great deal by being part of this Zen community in Buddhism called Sangha, right? There is a practice community, however small, and then there's regular practitioners, lay practitioners who come to be a part of this practice. So as one of my main learnings of being a part of the Zen Center is that you can learn so much by being put into close quarters day after day after day with people you may not have chosen to be friends with. And there's so much friction and challenges that come up in those daily living, right? But also moments of laughter and connection. And I've learned as much from that as from all the rest of my practice. So it's Georgia O'Keeffe who said, seeing a flower takes time, like having a friend takes time. Those small moments of genuine conversation can live our entire lives. So even though I may not have chosen to be friends with some of these people, but in these couple years, I've learned to love them. And from that love, actually, a kind of understanding emerges. So it's not the other way around. You don't have to understand someone or something to love them. You love them, and then the understanding comes, the insight comes, the wisdom comes. So in our busy lives, I know we sort of have to go against the grain a little bit to create community. There's a general gravity toward a fairly solitude existence or nuclear families and so on. But I think I'm dedicated to continue to create community in my life. So I would encourage you as well to, even though it takes a lot of dedication and energy to do this, but create situations where you have that non-separation, as we say in Buddhist terms, with other people, where you share the food, you share chores, you share children, you share elders, you share life together. And then you will find actually this bond is much stronger than our mental likes or dislikes. Don't give too much power to the mind that is always trying to maximize, trying to decide how much I'm going to get out of this time with these people, etc. Don't question it. Just make those situations happen that you know to be skillful, and keep being consistent at it, right? A little bit is consistently is better than chunks of time with a lot of laps, but just create those situations where you are in a community of practice. So on a weekly basis, I seem to have this kind of amazing experience. Many of these pictures are just from the ridge, the hill behind the Zen Center, where I often feel like I'm seeing the most beautiful scene I have ever seen in my entire life. And sometimes simple food can taste like the most beautiful experience ever. And a simple connection with someone can be the most delicious moment, right? And of course I know, like, it's not that the world around me has changed, but that I have changed. And because since I can recognize that feeling of this deep beauty inside me when I was very young, I realized that I have returned, or that I can return to that sweetness of existence, right? Just presence. Of course, life is not always easy or sweet. Life brings us challenges. So this is another little nature's part of nature near the Zen Center on the same ridge, and where a rock clearly has created life, a very difficult life for this maple tree. But the maple has wrapped itself around this rock, and the coexistence of the two of them actually made the whole thing much more beautiful. And I find that to be the case in our lives as well, right? If you go into a forest, you'll find actually almost every tree has had some significant challenge in its life, right? Whether it's thunder or snow or rocks or whatever, or disease. But that's what made them more interesting. And as a whole, they're actually much more beautiful because of all of that. Also, when I was initially preparing for this talk, I happened to listen to the pianist Nicholas Mccarthy, who is a one-handed pianist. You may have heard of this name, and check it out. It's extremely beautiful. And when he was applying to music schools, as you can imagine, he was told not to waste their time, nor waste his own, right? And how many people would have gone through the experience of all those rejections, yet continued on that path? But in changing his own life in this way, he has increased the freedom and the possibilities for so many other people. Right? It really moves me to hear stories like that, how you can challenge fate. And often we're actually all challenging our own fate in some way. Life doesn't give us challenges that we're not already prepared for, yet it is significant enough that it will make us question all of us, right? But you feel so much more alive in those moments because all of you and those things you don't think you have access to is called forth. So, when in those situations, it can feel like this will last forever. We don't know what to do, right? No solution comes to mind. We don't even know how to be in that situation. So why me is a natural question. Why you? Because this is how life purifies you. Sometimes the heart needed to open. I need to be broken open so that life can pour in. And sometimes it needed to be kept open, right? It needed to be so broken that it remains open. And there are significant challenges in my life. There were definitely moments when I felt like I'm standing on battleground after the battle had finished. And I'm a little bit shell-shocked, when I recall that feeling. I still feel a little bit shell-shocked. Right? It wasn't easy. I don't want to repeat that experience. But having gone through that and having survived it, I know that I'm victorious. Not against someone, but in life, being victorious in life, right? And having gone through those challenges I didn't know how to face, but somehow, I was able to do it. Not because of me, but because life actually essentially prepares all of us to go through those challenges. That's how I can be of help to other people. Because by facing those challenges, that's how I have purified my karma, my life. And so I actually believe we're all spiritual warriors. And our world needs spiritual warriors. There's significant work to do. There's work that we don't mentally know how to do, but it requires that of us now. We have, what seems to be intractable problems. It requires a different level of thinking. It was Einstein who said, you cannot solve a problem with the same level of consciousness that created the problem in the first place, right? Our thinking has created the problems, environment, education. There's a lot of suffering, right? Even though the world has enough resources for abundance. So how do we change that? We can't change it with the same thinking that created those problems. We have to shift that thinking. That is a warriorship that's asked for many of us now, and certainly those of our children. And lastly, share your story. Because I sort of move in different realms, I used to have this concern that the people in those different circles of my life wouldn't know how to integrate with each other, right? A little bit of this worlds collide kind of feeling. But that's just the mind creating separations that didn't need to be there in the first place. So if you share your story, among these realms, you're actually facilitating the integration for other people. We talked a little bit about, the terminology, right? Language is both a sort of vehicle for transmission, and sometimes it creates barriers as well. Like, I'm cautious about using the words Buddhist or spiritual in many of my conversations because I don't want it to become a barrier. But I've learned to share my story just on a human-to-human level, and to ask other people to share their story, right? Whether with me or with a small group. And in connecting with those human stories, you actually find that we're on such a shared journey, and we're actually facilitating this experience of integration for each other. And when you touch one person in that way, you see there's this tendrils of influence, going endlessly. One person who feels more empowered and resourced can touch so many other people in a sort of non-verbal way. But this energy, continues on, just like that ink in water, right? And so when you can do that, I really don't think there's anything better that is, worth my time. That is the work. And that is a dharma. So, I'll start the conclusion that I think is useful for us to talk not only about balance, but about integration. Balance implies a sense of lack, right? A zero-sum game, and the economic view based on that of scarcity. We all learned microeconomics in school where there's supply and demand, but it's based on essentially this point of view that there's scarcity in the world. But I'm suggesting something quite different, which is that there's abundance. Integration comes from that of abundance. When we look at nature, it's perfectly abundant, right? You feel a sense of abundance when you feel connected, when you're okay with that sort of deep, quiet place inside you, that there's no lack whatsoever. So in this talk, I use many synonyms: wisdom, beauty, meaning, stillness, light, love, and there can be many others that we know from Buddhist practice. And here I want to quote everyone's beloved poet Rumi, or paraphrase it rather. He said, you know enough to close all books. And I could add, to stop listening to all talks. You know everything that you need to know. All words and stories are foreplay. I have something else in mind for us now. The spiritual practice is the joining of the relative and the absolute. It is the same thing as a human life journey from birth until death. In that process, finding out what life is. So when I talk about spiritual alchemy, it's this process of taking everything in through our senses, through our heart, one of your strongest senses, purifying it through our life, through our meditation, but also our practice in the bigger sense, purifying it and touching the world through it. Your actions originate from your hara, from this deep place in your body. And this is what nature does, this purification process. It takes everything in, purify it, put it out, back into the world, back into the source, which is what we do as well. We may not think we're doing that, but that is what we're doing. And when we're acting from an integrated place, that happens much more readily. So I want to thank you for all the wisdom that you are creating in your life. And together, I would say that we're life, we're love, we're alchemy, we're the source. When you live from this place, when you practice simply, quietly and continuously. That's what I call integration. Thank you.